Helena was a woman weathered by years of struggle and heartache. Born and raised in a forgotten neighborhood, she had learned to navigate life on unlit streets paved with broken dreams. To the outside world, she was just a cleaner, a shadow passing quietly through the halls of a luxury high-rise. The residents didn't see her. They saw the spotless glass, the gleaming floors, and the absence of dust. Yet, unseen by many, Helena carried with her an unyielding strength, a quiet determination that was like a fire burning softly, powerful and steady. Her days began before the sun rose. She would catch the first bus from the edge of the city, her tired hands carrying the weight of too many years and too many sacrifices. At work, in the sprawling home of an influential businessman, she cleaned without complaint, scrubbing floors and polishing surfaces that shone brighter than most people's futures. What no one knew was that her heart held a secret, an unshakable belief that even in the coldest places, there was always space for warmth to grow. It was in this house, enormous yet devoid of love, that Helena first noticed Caio, the young son of her employer. At just 8 years old, Caio seemed like a ghost of himself, always silent, his gaze fixed on something far beyond the walls of his lavish home. The staff called him the Mute Boy, a label that stuck to him like the layers of dust Helena worked so hard to erase. But Helena saw more. She saw a lonely child trapped in silence, longing for a connection he was too wounded to seek himself. Caio wasn't sick, at least not physically, but his voice, his joy, they had been buried under years of fear and neglect. His father, a man whose wealth knew no bounds, had exhausted every possibility money could provide. Speech therapists, cutting-edge psychological treatments, private tutors, none could bring the boy out of his shell. His father grew frustrated, viewing Caio's condition as a problem to be solved with transactions. Yet for all that wealth and power, the boy remained silent. Helena, accustomed to being overlooked, understood exactly how Caio felt. She began to suspect that beyond the polished wood and crystal chandeliers, beyond the icy atmosphere of the home, a great deal of pain had been allowed to fester. More than anything, she saw in Caio's silence a reflection of her own struggles, the years she had spent hoping someone would notice her pain, but finding herself invisible to the world. Though she didn't know how, she resolved to be someone who would not give up on him no matter what. The father, Mr. Teixeira, was a man who measured success in numbers and power. He had grown used to having his orders followed without question, his problems solved with precision. He spent little time at home, preferring the company of boardrooms and business deals to the complexities of family. For him, Helena was a mere employee, there to perform her duties without intrusion or interest. He equated her worth with her salary, failing to see the quiet depth of the woman who silently observed what he refused to acknowledge, a house full of emptiness and a boy consumed by loneliness. Caio's mother was no longer in the picture. Her departure was a taboo subject in the household, whispered about by the maids but never addressed directly. To the father, this was a bitter stain that he scrubbed from the family narrative. But Helena suspected that the absence of a mother, of a warm and nurturing presence, had created a void in Caio's life that no amount of luxury could ever fill. It didn't take the sharpest intuition to notice that the boy's silence was his own form of grief. Quietly, with the same patience she used to sweep rooms and polish surfaces until they gleamed, Helena began to form a connection with Caio. She didn't force her attention on him, knowing instinctively that it would push him further away. Instead, she worked near him, humming softly as she arranged the books in the library or dusted the windows that overlooked the sprawling garden. While others treated his silence like a problem, something to fix, Helena treated it like a language, one she was willing to learn. At first, Caio was distant, wary even. His large, dark eyes would glance at her and then dart away. But Helena never faltered. Her presence was steady, like a second sunrise. Slowly, she began to notice the small shifts, the way his shoulders relaxed when she was near, the soft curiosity in his gaze as she hummed a melody from her childhood. These small changes were invisible to most, but to Helena, they were signs of life pushing through cracks in the concrete. The rest of the staff paid Helena little attention. To them, she was no different from the furniture she kept clean. a background presence necessary but unremarkable. When they noticed her taking an interest in Kaio, they raised their eyebrows and whispered their disapproval. "That's not for her to meddle." "Indeed," one of the cooks remarked. "She'll only upset Mr. Teixeira." But Helena wasn't deterred. She hadn't survived everything life threw at her to back down from something as trivial as gossip. One day, while clearing Kaio's room, Helena spotted something unusual on the floor. An old paper airplane creased and crumpled as though it had been thrown over and over again. Picking it up gently, she noticed scribbled words along one of the wings. "Help me." The sight of those two words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her suspicions were confirmed. Kaio wasn't silent by choice. He was drowning in emotions no one had taken the time to understand. Helena decided to act. The next morning, she brought a small notebook and a pencil with her to work. When she cleaned Kaio's room, she placed them carefully on his desk just within reach. She said nothing, only smiled when he glanced at the objects. For 2 days, they remained untouched. On the third day, however, Helena found the notebook open. With a single drawing inside, a crude sketch of a boy standing inside a hollow tree. It was simple, but it spoke volumes. As days turned into weeks, their unspoken bond grew stronger. Helena would occasionally leave the notebook open in different parts of the house, encouraging Kaio to interact without feeling pressured. At first, he responded with more drawings, trees, rivers, and solitary birds. But eventually, words began to appear. They were small and scattered, like seeds planted in dry soil. Lonely, scared, mama. Each word was a window into his world, and Helena cherished them all. Mr. Teixeira began to notice the change before he could understand it. Kaio, who had once been a shadow in his own home, seemed brighter somehow. He lingered more in the living room, his small frame less hunched, his presence less ghostly. At first, he attributed it to the latest therapy session or perhaps a phase that would pass. But as the days went on, it became undeniable. Something was shifting, and it wasn't by his design. The turning point came one afternoon when Helena was cleaning the piano room. She often found solace in the golden sunlight that spilled through the tall windows, dancing off the polished keys. As she dusted, she began to hum a lullaby from her childhood, the kind her grandmother had sung to her on nights when she felt most alone. Suddenly she stopped, not because she was done, but because a faint sound reached her ears. It was Kaio, standing a few steps away. His lips parted as he tried to mirror the tune she was humming. The sound was faint, breathy, and uneven, but it was unmistakably his voice. Helena froze, her heart swelling with a mix of shock and overwhelming joy. She didn't want to startle him, so she continued humming, but softer now, giving him space to join in if he wished. For a brief moment, their voices met in harmony, and it felt as though the walls of the cold house melted just slightly. When the moment passed and silence returned, Helena turned to him and smiled. "That was beautiful, Kaio," she said softly, careful not to overwhelm him. He didn't respond with words, but the way his gaze met hers for the first time, fully, without shyness, was an answer in itself. From that point on, their connection was no longer invisible. It became a thread that began to stitch warmth and life back into corners of the house that had long gone cold. When Mr. Teixeira learned of what had happened, he was skeptical at first. He spoke. "With her?" he asked one of the housekeepers, his tone laden with disbelief. "The cleaner?" But as nights passed and Helena's name began to come up more frequently in Kaio's new, hesitant words, the truth became impossible to ignore. Kaio's progress was undeniable, and it wasn't the result of expensive therapies or the latest techniques. It was Helena, her patience, her quiet presence, and her unshakable belief in the boy. For the first time in years, Mr. Teixeira began to feel something crack within his carefully constructed armor. He had relied on control for so long that he didn't know how to process a development he hadn't orchestrated. Yet as he watched his son sit closer to Helena during meals, or cautiously reach for her hand on particularly hard days, he began to question whether control was the solution at all. But the changes weren't smooth or without resistance. For Helena, every small victory was met with new challenges. Kaio would speak 3 words one day, and retreat into silence the next. His drawings became darker, filled with stormy skies and lonely figures. Helena knew better than to push him. Healing isn't a straight road, she reminded herself on the difficult days. Still, her patience remained her greatest strength, rooted in a certainty that progress, no matter how slow, was still progress. The staff began noticing the subtle shifts in the household dynamics, exchanging curious glances whenever they saw Kaio trailing behind Helena as she moved about the house. The cook, who had once dismissed Helena's efforts, began to soften, offering Kaio small desserts he timidly accepted. Even the butler, who had always been firmly loyal to Mr. Teixeira's rules and hierarchy, couldn't help but admit that this once lifeless home now pulsed with a newfound energy. Helena, however, remained humble, refusing recognition. To her, this was not a job anymore. It was a calling. Meanwhile, Mr. Teixeira observed these changes with a mix of relief and, unease. He wasn't a cruel man, but he was lost. A father who hadn't known how to connect with a son so deeply hurt by his mother's absence and his own emotional distance. In seeing the bond between Kaio and Helena, he felt a pang of jealousy. She, a stranger, had succeeded where he had failed, but lingering beneath that jealousy was something unfamiliar to him: admiration. Kaio's first full sentence came on a crisp autumn evening. He and Helena were in the garden, the smell of wet earth lingering after a recent rain. Helena was showing him how to press flowers between the pages of a book, a simple activity she had loved as a girl. Kaio then pointed to a purple petal trembling in the wind and murmured, "What kind of flower is this?" It was a simple question, spoken softly yet clearly, but to Helena it was as if the heavens had opened. She blinked back tears, swallowing the lump in her throat. "It's a violet," she replied, handing him the delicate flower. "They're small and quiet, but they're strong. They survive in the harshest of places." Kaio nodded, cradling the violet in his small hands. For the first time in years, he looked less like a boy weighed down by the world's heaviness, and more like someone learning to breathe freely. News of Kaio's progress eventually reached the therapists who had long given up on him. They insisted on reevaluating his condition, eager to claim this unexpected breakthrough as a result of their earlier work. Mr. Teixeira, however, was beginning to see the truth. No expensive professional had done what Helena had. She had met the boy where he was, never rushing, but steadily building a bridge between their worlds. Yet even as he began to soften toward her, his pride kept him from expressing this realization. As autumn deepened, Kaio's drawings began to change. Instead of somber sketches of trees and empty skies, he started drawing people: a woman with kind eyes and braided hair, a little boy holding her hand. Helena recognized herself and Kaio in those images. One day, he handed her a drawing of the two of them standing beneath a bright yellow sun. Beneath it, in shaky but legible letters, he had written, "Thank you." Holding the drawing in her calloused hands, Helena felt tears warm against her cheeks. She hadn't expected gratitude, nor had she sought it. All she had ever wanted was for Kaio to feel seen, to feel safe enough to find his voice. "You don't have to thank me, Kaio," she said gently. "You've had this strength in you all along. I just helped you see it." As winter approached, changes stirred in Mr. Teixeira himself. He started arriving home earlier, joining Kaio and Helena during their afternoon garden rituals. At first, he stood at a distance, unsure of how to approach his son. But little by little, he inched closer. One day, he surprised both Helena and Kaio by kneeling beside them in the damp soil, awkwardly attempting to plant a bulb. Kaio giggled, a small sound, but genuine. That laugh was a revelation to Mr. Teixeira. He had hired experts, bought the most advanced technology, and spent endless sums of money, thinking that wealth could fix what was broken. But it wasn't science or money that had drawn that laugh from his son. It was Helena. She had done what he couldn't. She had made Kaio smile again. And in that moment, Mr. Teixeira realized how far he still had to go to earn his son's laughter. One evening, as Helena prepared to leave for the day, Mr. Teixeira stopped her at the door. His usual commanding demeanor was replaced by deep hesitation. "Helena," he began, looking down at the floor before meeting her eyes. I haven't said this enough," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "But thank you For everything you've done for Kaio, for me, for this house." Helena blinked in surprise, not used to hearing such words from him. She smiled softly, placing her bag over her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me," she replied. "Your son is the one who did the hard work. He just needed someone to believe in him." Mr. Teixeira nodded, though he felt humbled. He had spent so long believing that success was built on control and dominance, yet here was a woman teaching him that true strength came from humility and care. As the first snow began to fall, Kaio's voice grew stronger. He no longer whispered but spoke in halting, thoughtful sentences. One chilly evening, he surprised the household by asking if they could all decorate the Christmas tree together. The staff had long grown used to assembling the tree in silence, but this year, Kaio dragged garlands across the living room, laughing as Helena helped him untangle lights. Even Mr. Teixeira climbed a ladder to place the star atop the tree. It was a scene of warmth the house had never known. For years, it had stood as a monument to wealth and loneliness. Now, with Kaio's shy laughter filling the air, it began to feel like a true home. The staff, once detached and formal, found themselves swept into the celebration. By the time the tree shimmered with lights and ornaments, there was a sense of togetherness that no one could deny. Weeks turned into months, and the bond between Kaio, his father, and Helena only grew stronger. Mr. Teixeira began taking Kaio on walks in the garden in the early mornings, something he had never made time for before. Though awkward at first, these quiet moments became treasures for both of them. Slowly, Mr. Teixeira realized that his role wasn't just to provide for his son materially, it was to be present. One day, during one of their walks, Kaio confessed something that startled his father. "I thought you didn't love me," he said softly, kicking the ground with his small boots. Tears welled in Mr. Teixeira's eyes, but for the first time he didn't suppress them. He knelt before his son, gripping his small shoulders. "I do love you, Kaio. I always have," he said, his voice breaking. "I just didn't know how to show it. But I'm going to try harder, I promise." Kaio's quiet confidence continued to grow. He began attending school again, something that had once seemed impossible. Though his voice was sometimes shaky, he no longer shied away from speaking in front of others. He even made a few friends, bringing their laughter and stories home to share with Helena in the evenings. One day, as Mr. Teixeira looked at his son's progress, a thought crossed his mind. He wanted to formally recognize Helena's role in their lives. Calling her into his office, he offered her a permanent position as Kaio's caretaker, with a significant raise. But Helena surprised him by declining. "I'll always be here for Kaio when he needs me," she said kindly. "But this is your journey now. He needs you more than anyone else." Her words stayed with him. It was true. Kaio no longer needed Helena in the same way. What she had given was a gift beyond measure: hope, love, and the belief that he could heal. With her gentle encouragement, both father and son had found their way back to each other. The last time Helena saw Kaio, it was on a spring afternoon. She had come to visit on her day off, bringing with her a tiny pot of violets for him to plant. "To remind you of how strong you are," she said with a smile. Kaio, now confident and bright-eyed, hugged her tightly. "I'll be strong like you," he whispered. As she walked away from the house, Helena felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come into their lives as a cleaner, invisible, and unremarkable, but she left as something far greater. Someone who had swept away the shadows not just from rooms, but from hearts. Helena returned to her life after leaving the Teixeira household, but found that certain moments stayed with her. Every so often she would remember how Kaio had hugged her for the last time, or how his shy smile had blossomed into something radiant. Those memories fueled her on the tougher days, even as she cleaned other houses, entering new spaces with their own silences and busyness. She held on to the knowledge that she had made a difference, not through grand gestures, but through patience and love. Kaio, on the other hand, often spoke about Helena in the months following her departure. To his father, and sometimes even to his new friends, he would proudly tell little stories about her, how she showed him how to plant flowers, how she made the best sandwiches when the cook was out, or how she always smelled faintly of lavender, a scent he now associated with safety. She had become a figure in his life that carried the same weight as family, perhaps even more so. Mr. Teixeira, meanwhile, continued to evolve as a father. Helena's refusal to take on a permanent role in Caio's life had shaken him, but also inspired him. It forced him to step up in ways he had previously avoided. He understood now that money could buy services, expertise, time, but not love. He began scheduling regular outings with his son, from simple trips to the park to short vacations at the beach, where Caio would draw pictures in the sand, laughing brightly as Teixeira chased him through the crashing waves. One evening, as Caio and his father sat together on the porch watching fireflies dance in the distant garden, the boy looked up at him and said, "Do you think Helena would visit again someday?" The question caught Mr. Teixeira off guard, but he smiled softly. "I'm sure she will. But even if she doesn't, Caio, she's always with us. Here." He gently placed a hand over his son's chest, where his heart beat steadily beneath his shirt. Caio thought about that for a moment, and then nodded, his gaze distant, but content. He had grown so much since the days of silence, but he knew now that silence didn't have to mean loneliness. Helena had taught him that, and so had his father. He still had moments of fear, but he wasn't afraid of trying anymore, and that, above all, gave him hope for his future. Months passed, and the Teixeira household thundered with new life. The laughter that had once been absent now echoed from room to room. Even the staff, who had once walked on eggshells around their distant employer, found themselves chatting with Caio, and occasionally with Mr. Teixeira himself. Helena's presence had changed them all in ways they hadn't fully grasped yet, but the impact was undeniable. One day, Helena received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from Caio, and it began with the words, "Dear Helena, I've been practicing my writing, so now I can write to you properly." The letter was filled with updates about his life, how he was doing better in school, how he had made a best friend named Lucas, and how he had even joined a drawing club. At the end, he had drawn another picture, this time of a flower blooming under the sun, with a curly-haired woman standing next to it. Helena smiled as she read the letter, her heart swelling with pride and joy. She carefully folded it and tucked it into a drawer, knowing she would treasure it forever. Caio's progress wasn't just a reflection of how far he had come, but also of what happens when someone believes deeply in another person. Helena hadn't just helped him find his voice, she had helped him find his light. Years later, Caio and his father stood side by side at the doorway of their home, watching as a car pulled up the driveway. Out stepped Helena, her hair now streaked with silver but her warm presence unchanged. Caio, now a teenager, ran to her with a grin that stretched across his face. They embraced tightly, and Helena marveled at how much he had grown, not just in height, but in spirit. As they walked back inside together, the house no longer felt like the cold, lonely place it had been all those years ago. Caio's laughter, Mr. Teixeira's quiet affection, and the memories they shared brought the home alive with warmth. And Helena, who had once stepped into that house as an invisible outsider, now walked in as part of the family, an unshakable bond born from persistence, care, and love.